Hello. I don't really know how to write an intro. I just want to put my Deltarune theory out there before Chapter 5 comes out, so that whenever it comes true, I could say I was right all along. So yeah, that's about it. I also don't know how to write segues, so I'm just gonna cut this audio at a time I feel would be fun. So, the knight, right? That's this little guy, if you didn't know. A question that's been circling the Deltarune community since Chapter 3 and 4 came out has been, who is that little guy? And basically everybody has agreed at this point that it is December holiday. So we haven't really seen much discussion, or at least I haven't. I haven't been really keeping up with the Deltarune community, but I'm pretty sure people are still in agreement that it's Des. Regardless, it's already been a minute, so I'm gonna just share my idea with you guys now, because I think I'm cooking. So the Roaring Knight is almost definitely wearing armor of some kind. This is not how a normal Lightner looks. So, my idea is, can't anyone equip the armor? Yeah, this is just multi-knight. I haven't seen much in the terms of multi-knight. I've only heard whispers in other videos, vague mentions of it. Like, people will just say, if you're a multi-knight believer, etc, etc. Okay, so anyone can put on the armor, but how do you put on the armor? I think you need the black shard item for it. I think there has to be some kind of ritual where you open a dark fountain with the black shard specifically, and that lets you put on the armor for the knight. Don the armor of the knight, I should say. I feel like this would explain away a lot of the seeming plot holes that come with the other singular knights theories like Des or Carol. Like, if the knight is Carol, how did she open up a church dark fountain, show up home, and then show up in the church again? Did she just run really fast? Another thing this could explain is why Chris was knighted in the scene where you defeat the knight. I'm pretty sure the general consensus on that is it was because Chris opened the fountain and made the deal with Tenna and set everything up for the knight, which I kinda believe, not really, because the knight doesn't knight Chris if you lose against the knight. They only knight Chris if you win and get the black shard. The knighting is an acknowledgement that Chris now has access to the Roaring Knight form. What I find kind of funny about this is that if this is true, the only two people we have absolutely confirmed as a knight right now is Chris, obviously, if they beat the knight, and Asgore, because of the whole secret scene in Noel's house where he reveals he has a black shard. And that's it. Although we know those can't be the only two knights because Chris gets access to the black shard after beating another knight, and I don't think Asgore would be willing to hurt Chris unless the knight form it takes over you in a way, which I don't believe it does. So I'm pretty sure at least one of the holidays are also a knight. Probably more than one, I think. Anyway, that's basically my entire point. Anybody can be the Roaring Knight. You are the Roaring Knight. I am the Roaring Knight. Chris is the Roaring Knight. As long as you have access to a black shard, you can stab the earth with it, and you will don the knight armor. This also means that if we see someone in the Dark World, that it doesn't necessarily deconfirm them as a knight. Like if we see normal Asgore in the Chapter 5 Dark World, and then the Roaring Knight in another Dark World, that Roaring Knight could still be Asgore. He just opened up that fountain with the black shard. You could also imagine a scene in Chapter 5 where I haven't actually watched the Chapter 5 trailer, so if we've already seen Asgore in there, I'm gonna crash out. But it would be really cool to find the dark fountain in the flower store and have the gang worry about how Asgore is doing in there. But when you enter, you don't see Asgore. You just meet the Roaring Knight. Because Asgore stabbed the earth with a black shard. There is no Asgore. Well, he's still there. He's just not, himself. Anyway, I don't really have any more predictions for Chapter 5 of Deltarune other than Asgore being the Roaring Knight for this Dark World. Again, I haven't seen the trailer. So, the rest of this is just basically gonna be me revisiting the events of Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 and speculate on some of it using this new context. With that being said, I'm like 90% sure that the knight we see first at the end of Chapter 3 is Carol Holiday. There's not a lot of people in Hometown, I feel, who would be capable of dragging Undyne all the way from the top of town down to the shelter, but I think Carol is one of those people. And then the knight we see in Chapter 2, honestly, considering their behavior is a lot different from the knight we see in Chapter 3, they're like laughing at us, they're aura farming in front of us, and they attack Chris at the beginning, which I'll get to. I feel like this one is December Holiday. Also, the fact that Gerson is in it. According to Ralze, darkness patterned after a memory of a loved one can only be made in specific dark worlds, and I think he's actually referencing the dark worlds made from the Black Shard. Like, the Black Shard dark worlds have a lot of power, so much so that it can resurrect the dead. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, the fact that Gerson is a mentor figure points to this dark world being made by December Holiday, I feel, because if it was made by Carol, he'd be more of like, I don't know, a business partner. I don't know how Carol saw him, but I'm pretty sure that Des was taught by him, so it would make sense that she sees him in like a very personal mentor way, that in the way that he is with Susie in that chapter. Although, I don't know how much I like that, because if December is the knight in Chapter 4, why doesn't Noelle know anything about this? I feel like Noelle would deserve to know that her sister is in fact alive and well, causing, as well as someone trying to cause a roaring would be. Anyway, it's just weird to me that Noelle is kept out of all of this when seemingly the rest of her family and the Dreamer family, well, actually just Asgore, know about it. Unless, hear me out, Carol and December are working against each other, despite both being the Roaring Knight. I'm not gonna really get into their exact goals, because that's a whole nother can of worms, and this recording is already going a lot longer than I wanted it to initially, so we'll just take that for now. They're working against each other, but since they look the same, and Chris was told there'd be a dark fountain in the church, what if Chris doesn't know that it's December? What if Chris still thinks it's Carol? In the first encounter against the knight in Chapter 4, you're basically greeted to a lot of swords, and you are meant to die to it. I think you get like 3 shot by it that scene. But regardless, if you actually make it to the knight, they will like surprise attack Chris almost, and I feel like that's very similar to a betrayal kill back in Undertale. If you didn't know, if you are able to spare an enemy in Undertale, and then you choose to attack them, you deal like a lot more damage. And I feel like that was what's going on if you make it to the end with Chris. And then Chris thinks of that as like a betrayal, because that's not actually their teammate in the knight outfit. And from there, Chris is now keenly aware that the knight is not their teammate, especially since if Carol and Des have differing goals. I know I said I wouldn't get into it, but basically my idea was that Des wants to follow the prophecy, start the roaring, and Carol wants to do the opposite of that. I think that the encounter with Carol, because I don't know how willing Chris would be to go with a plan in which Toriel gets hurt, and why would Chris be, willing to let the knight kidnap Toriel unless it was more to do to keep her safe so that the other knight doesn't get her for whatever reason. Carol has like a whole thing with preservation, if you didn't know. It could like have a lot to do with that, but I said twice, it's all over for me. Anyway, in chapter... Let's just go through the order of events in chapter 4 now, because I feel like it. So, in chapter 4, I think Carol's original plan was to open the church dark fountain to get Toriel back, which is what she was calling Chris on the phone about. Open dark fountain, go get Toriel, skedaddle out of there. But then she's back to being called over to her house because Susie has got the guitar. So they're putting a bit of the pause on their plans. But while she goes back over there, what if December were to arrive in the dark world, seal the fountain, then make her own dark world in that same place to ambush Chris and the fun gang? It makes sense. It all makes sense. I've solved Deltarune Chapter 4! Wait a minute. Monsters can't seal dark fountains. That's like Chris's whole thing. The fact that they're human, they can seal a dark fountain. Did I just shoot myself in the foot here? Anyway, so all that does not happen. Instead, Carol just delays making the dark fountain because she has to go back over to her house and get the guitar from Susie. And then Chris and Susie make it to the church where they see the dark world, and the dark fountain's already opened. Chris is just like, wow, Carol is like really fast, I guess. She beat us here. And that's when they see like the dark world with Des there instead, ready to ambush them, like I said before. Anyway, I think that's all my talking points from what I remember that I wanted to bring up. Fuck the weird route. Fuck, this recording's been going on for so long. Fuck! So, Chris is weird, because they're the knight, but only when you actually kill the Roaring Knight, or rather, break off their shard, because then the knight knights Chris gets access to the Black Shard, and boom, now Chris is one of the Roaring Knights. So, because Chris is only sometimes the Roaring Knight, I don't actually think we're gonna get to ever encounter Chris as the Roaring Knight, as sick and awesome as that would be, other than, I guess, if all the Shadow Crystals had, like, whenever you bring them to Sham, it leads them to their own quest line, where, for whatever fucking reason, Chris wants to break the soul out and stab the earth with the Black Shard and become the Roar. No, that doesn't make sense either, because from what I've seen, it seems like Chris also wants the Shadow Crystals, so they would be more willing to go with the questline. Yeah, it just seems really unlikely that we're ever gonna actually see Chris Knight, unfortunately. It's just that, they could if they wanted to. Although there is one way I think we could see it. I kind of already spoiled it, but basically, in the weird route, it's been made pretty likely that you're gonna need to get all the Shadow Crystals to continue the weird route, because they will most likely make I believe it was called the Pure Crystal from Malleus, and then you can combine that with a Thorn Ring to get the Twisted Sword, and then that'll have something to do in the weird route. Like, you need the Twisted Sword to continue the weird route. Anyway, all I'm really saying is that you're gonna likely need all 5 Shadow Crystals to do the weird route. And if you need all 5 Shadow Crystals, that means you need to defeat the Roaring Knight and get Chris the Black Shard. You see where I'm going with this, right? I think in the weird route, we're gonna get a Soul versus Chris Knight fight. Like, Chris is going to get so desperate that they open the Dark Fountain with the Black Shard to face us as the Knight. And we've seen the Knight stats. They're very powerful. And Chris is also the holder of the Shadow Mantle, so you probably won't get the Shadow Mantle either. I guess, unless you equip it on Noel. Scratch that, actually. Never mind. Regardless, a Chris Knight fight would be very cool. I think, especially if they're doing it as like a desperate last stand to get their friend back in the weird route. That would just be so sick. Tobias Foxington, please make it happen. And with that, I believe that is all my talking points. Well, it's not, actually. There's a lot more I wanted to yap about, but this recording has been going on for long enough already, so I think I'll just cut it here. I don't really know how to do an outro either. If you couldn't tell, this is definitely my first time doing anything like this, so it's all been very scuffed. I just wanted to get proof, basically, out there that if this ever does end up being even slightly true, I can, in fact, claim with evidence that I knew it before Chapter 5. With that being said, piss off.